Welcome to An Outside View. I'm your host, Dick Sicaro, and joining me today is former Selectwoman Ann Ragosta and former RTM. Ann, welcome back on the show.
Thank you, Dick. It's great to be here.
This is my first official fall show after taking the summer off, so
very excited.
I couldn't ask for a better guest. So you moved out of Walpole.
Yes.
Unfortunately, as far as we're concerned, we're going to miss you.
It was bittersweet, but
right.
There's a time for everything, and it was time for me to explore new pastures and everything.
Right.
So,
well, we wish you the best of luck in all future endeavors in your new move.
Thank you.
Let's talk about your role as a selectwoman. You served a term, and also as an RTM.
Yes.
So maybe we can talk about your experiences and some of the highs and lows of serving the public as the role of a select person.
Sure. So as you know, I was very passionate about running. I was very concerned about the direction that I saw the town going in. I'd been an RTM for several years. I served on the personnel board. I served on the finance committee. So I was able to really get an inside view of how the town operated, sort of the mindset of everything. And I, as a taxpayer and a longtime resident, I just didn't like how I saw things were running. So I said, you know what, I'm not just going to sit here and complain. I'm actually going to put my hat in the ring. And as you know, I ran, I campaigned really hard, and my platform was, I'm going to be your voice, and I'm going to represent and advocate the hardworking taxpayers and try to reduce taxes. So the part I loved about being a select woman was listening to the taxpayers and the residents of Walpole, hearing their concerns, advocating on their behalf. If they were having issues with any part of town administration, to try to resolve that issue, in their favor, and really just be the voice that I don't think that people feel that they have. Because that's what they elect us for, to represent them. And so that was the good part.
Right.
That was the best part. That was actually the best part of being a select woman.
As a fellow RTM, I had the pleasure of working with you at the town meetings. And one of the initiatives that you put in a proposal was to take some of the $6.5 million free cash that the town carries year to year and return it back to the taxpayers, so they wouldn't have to be taxed to the max, the full 2.5% under Proposition 2.5. And that measure failed by a pretty good margin, if I recall the numbers. It seemed like we were always 25 votes short of the agendas that we were promoting to help the people.
Right.
So you want to comment on that and some of the experiences behind the scenes?
Sure. So as you know, and many of the taxpayers of Walpole know, I was an advocate for reducing taxes, and really one of the ways to do that was to take our excess tax revenues that's collected every year and not spent, not needed to be spent because it's not budgeted in the overall budget, and that's exactly what it is. It's excess tax revenue. It is a surplus. That free cash, the definition of free cash is that it is surplus. Despite what Selectman O'Neill said at town meeting, and Selectman Gallivan reiterated, they kept parroting the same false information that free cash is not surplus and that it creates an inherent deficit. That's just wrong. So a lot of misinformation was provided, unfortunately, because they just didn't want to reduce taxes for the taxpayer. So 2 years in a row at Fall Town Meeting, I did the citizens petition where I got hundreds of signatures, so easily, not even working hard to tell the taxpayers, we have all this free cash, it's not budgeted, it's surplus money, it can be returned back to the taxpayer in the form of a reduced tax rate in the next year. That a portion of that all of the $6 million could have been appropriated, or a small amount. I was only seeking $1 million to $1.5 million of it to be taken out of the free cash account, put back into the revenue account, and that would be $1 or $1.5 million less that the town would have to collect in taxes from the taxpayer the next year. And as you know from town meeting, there were so many RTMs who resisted it. They did not want it. I do not believe that they were acting on the best interests of the taxpayer. I know a lot of taxpayers contacted them and said, we need tax relief. I mean, as an RTM, you know, you talk to people all the time. Walpole taxpayers are yearning and screaming for tax relief. In the RTMs, the majority of RTMs, unfortunately, just went with their own philosophy of we can tax to the max, we can tax up to the 2.5%. We're going to do that regardless of how much money we have left over, because we will find a need to spend it. And I just find it was shameful. And in addition to that, and I'm not sure if you're aware of this, so that was 2 years in a row at town meeting, but there were also 2 years of opportunities during the rate setting, where the Board of Selectmen and the assessors set the tax rate for the next year. And both of those years, there was still an opportunity to even put $100,000 or $200,000 that was not even part of free cash. It was part of another surplus fund that could have been used to reduce. And the Board of Selectmen voted twice. The majority of the board voted no both times. They couldn't even find it within themselves to give a lousy $200,000 back to the taxpayers. So it's very unfortunate.
Right.
So I would say that's probably that was the worst part of.
But for the viewers, to put things in perspective, the Department of Revenue that oversees all the city and town, the finances, they recommend that town and city should have roughly 3% of their budget in free cash. Now, in Walpole's situation, if it's a $100 million budget, which is close now, that would be $3 million. So they have double the amount that the Department of Revenue recommends. Right.
And actually, so free cash, there's a couple of different buckets that you can put free cash into for your reserve fund. So let's say there's 3% in free cash at the end of the year. It cannot stay in free cash. It does have to be moved out. It either has to be spent or it has to be returned back to the taxpayers, which many towns do, by the way. I mean, they have their, they don't tax up to their levy limit. And some of it can be put into reserve fund. And our reserve fund, to town administrators' credit, has been being built up. I think it's been being built up from pressure from a few RTMs that are fiscal conservatives, and said we need to start building up our reserve fund. So it's perfectly fine. But in a reserve fund, I think we're pretty close to where we probably need to be, where Walpole would need to be. I think it's better to have a little bit more in the reserve fund, but that's really not where the bulk of the free cash was going. Very small amount was going. It was, as you know, and anyone can see from the appropriations, that it was being spent on items.
And they have other funds, stabilization fund for, like, if you have a bad winter, you need excess money to plow the streets. Sand
exactly. And every year, whatever's not spent in that, and that's part of the rate setting, some of that money can just go back into free cash.
Now, you mentioned an interesting point, the inner workings of the politics and the votes. It seems like a lot of times, and I followed a lot of the select meeting, where you and Dave Salvatore where it seemed like you were outvoted 3-2, 3-2, 3-2. Not only on the select person level, but in the RTMs, we failed by a third of the votes. So you want to comment a little bit on why you saw it that way? I mean, is it difference of political philosophies, or?
Right. It's definitely a difference of political, well, I don't know about political philosophy, but more governing philosophy. My mindset, and I don't want to speak for David Salvatore, but Selectman Salvatore is a man of the people, and he cares deeply about the taxpayers' pockets. It was obvious. I mean, anyone could look at this, watch the selectmen meetings, not just on the votes and how they always transpired, but it was typically 3-2. But even in the discussion, in the debate, there was a lack of compromise unlike I've ever witnessed in my life. At any idea or issue that I brought up and that I identified and said, I think this is a problem with our taxation, or the 3 other selectmen on the board, They were, Mr. Gallivan, Mr. O'Neill, and Ms. McKenzie, and at one point it was Mr. Kraus. Although Mr. Kraus, let me just back up. I would like to say that Mr. Gallivan and Eric Kraus were gentlemen of the first order as the chairs of the board. Always gave me my time to speak, always never cut me off, and they really let me fully. So I appreciate that of them. I would never say anything bad about that. I think that to their credit that they did that. That being said, I think sometimes you can let someone speak all they want, but that doesn't mean you're actually listening or that you intend to compromise or even hear what they have to say. The philosophy of our town administration, of our elected officials, but at the select board level and at the RTM level, has been, and even at the other appointed boards, really, has been to tax to the max. They really drive their revenue up as much as possible. And actually, Selectman Gallivan said it when he was campaigning several times. I want maximum revenue maximization. That's his philosophy. That's his governing philosophy. And that was, I think, the majority of the board's philosophy. So because that's their philosophy, nothing was going to change that. And no matter how many times I said, the taxpayers of Walpole are hurting. They are crying out for tax relief. People have to move out of town. They never, ever, ever gave that any credibility. I don't know why. It's remarkable to me. I don't know if they didn't believe me. I don't know why, but it really was a matter of really a difference in governing. And sadly, there was not 1 ounce of compromise. No one. I mean, if I came up and said, let's take $1.5 million out of free cash, there wasn't one voice to say, well, we really don't want to do $1.5 million because we might need some of that money out of the $7 million each year. But, maybe $500,000, or maybe instead of taxing to 2.5% this year, we'll tax 2.25%. Just a minuscule amount. Never even went that way. And we'll see as the years go down. I'm not a resident of Walpole anymore, so I won't have any standing. I'd like to think I have some standing still because of my 17 years of paying real estate taxes into the system. Things are still being paid for with that. But it's really imperative that the taxpayers of Walpole stand up, feel that they have a voice, and start making some noise.
Unfortunately, I've always had a bone of contention with some of the elected officials. They have that mindset, and the new selectman I was just voted in last election, I was at one of the debates where he came right out and said taxes are healthy for the town. But they don't understand that it's more, you can't place the burden on people's backs constantly, because sooner or later that bubble's going to burst. People move out, and they're going to replace that income with other types of income. The seniors are on living income, but there's other ways to save money, more innovative ways, and also take a look at better managing some of the departments. So let's talk about what happens when the budget comes to you. So the town administrator, he works with all the department heads. They present their individual budgets to him, and he comes before the selectmen? How does that work? Or they come before you directly?
No, the department heads come to the town administrator. I think he gives them an idea of what what the revenue is going to be, or what he expects the revenue to be. So they have their parameters to work in, and they prepare their budgets. I think they all work diligently together to prepare a workable budget. And then it comes before the Board of Selectmen. It goes to the Finance Committee. It goes to the different committees and boards for their recommendations. Do they approve it, or are there some tweaks that they want to make to it? But again, the budget in Walpole is revenue driven. So they have their revenue numbers that they know that they can collect, which is the 2.5% over the prior years, plus new growth and any other state aid and things like that. So some of it's estimated. Jim Johnson, the current town administrator, has always conservatively underestimated the new growth, because he doesn't want to count on that money in case it doesn't come in, and he doesn't want to have to appropriate something that's not going to be collected. So I applaud that, in terms of being conservative and not over appropriating for something that you don't know if you're
Overstating the
going to
revenue
correct.
projections.
But that being said, it's when you realize that you have collected more than you have spent, that circles
Right.
back to the free cash, and it should be returned back to the taxpayer.
Right. And what role does the Finance Committee have in this? And how many members are in the Finance Committee?
So Finance Committee, also affectionately known as FinCom, they have 15 members who are appointed by the town moderator, who Dan Bruce has been the town moderator for several years. I could go into the again philosophy of the current Finance Committee board and how it's been in the last few years. Let's just say that the majority of FinCom members believe in the collective as opposed to the individual. They believe, they're willing to spend the money. They big government, big town government. They want town government to do more for the people instead of the people just, And I always say, you hear several selectmen talk about the quality of life. We want to help the quality of life.
Right.
I can think of no better method of increasing someone's quality of life than keeping more money in their pocket to spend as they choose.
Right.
Not to put it into one big pot and have a few bureaucrats say,
Right.
this is where we think the money should be going.
So that's a buzzword we hear all the time. Better quality of life.
Better quality of life.
And also I see.
As if town government,
Right.
that's their job. Town government's job, as I
Right.
see it, and I think people who elected me to be a select woman, good public safety, good roads, good schools, good trash pickup.
Right.
If you have that, and your
Right.
town is a wonderful place to live,
Right.
because that's really what town government should be doing.
Right. Another sign I see when I'm frequently walking my dogs throughout the neighborhoods, I see these signs on some of the homes saying there's no room for hate in our home.
Hate has no home here.
Right. What is that all about?
I got to tell you, that's been a pet peeve of mine for years. I find those signs offensive. I find them insulting, because when I see them, and all I can think is the people that have these signs are sending a message to passersby and Walpole residents that I have this sign here because if I didn't have this sign here, the absence of a sign on someone's home implies that Walpole is not inclusive, Walpole is dangerous, Walpole doesn't like different people, or is not a diverse community.
Right.
So I'm not sure why people have those signs there. I don't know what has compelled them to have to say that. I think
Right.
Walpole is a very welcoming community. I can't imagine, and we're lectured by certain people. We're lectured by a couple of RTMs that, and actually, Selectman Barrett, that Walpole isn't inclusive, and this is why we have the Walpole Housing Partnership. And Selectman Barrett, his primary issue when he was running was that the lack of affordable housing is the number one issue in Walpole. And it's affordable housing not really for Walpole residents that
Right.
can afford, but to bring others from outside our town
Correct.
to come in. So, they're lecturing us on not being inclusive, and I just don't see it. I mean, I think that, I look at Mr. Barrett on his 3-acre, he lives in North Walpole on his 3-acre lot.
Right.
Is he selling 2 of his acres to a developer to build affordable housing? Right? And he's lecturing, it's easy for him to say, the downtown, we can do dense housing and cluster housing. I think it's pretty
kinda
hypocritical
Correct.
if it's not, if
Right.
like I said, I think we're being lectured by those signs, which I find offensive, and I think we're being lectured by words that we're not
Right.
inclusive enough. And I think it's a huge disservice to the
Right.
residents of Walpole, who are, from my own personal experience, truly the salt of the earth, who just people give their shirts off their back, the sense of community, and civility is really unparalleled. And for us to have those signs saying that,
Right.
hate it.
So it is offensive.
I have no hate in my home. I don't need a sign to say that.
I find the irony, a lot of times those people that put the signs up, they're the biggest haters.
Yeah, it's really
Right.
something.
Yeah.
I mean, I just don't get it.
Correct.
I had some woman, I was being interviewed as a select woman. This was a couple of years ago. I don't know if she was a plant. I don't quite know why she was interviewing me, but, and she made a statement, and I don't want to get into national politics, but she made a statement about, if she saw a Trump sign on someone's yard, she would feel afraid. And I said, oh my gosh, has anyone ever made you feel afraid in Walpole?
Right.
And she said, no. I said, so you're telling me you feel afraid, but no one's ever made you feel afraid. And I just can't reconcile sort of that emotional
Right.
reaction as opposed to facts or
Right.
examples. And, if someone in Walpole makes someone feel not welcome, shame on them. And we should not
Right.
tolerate that. But I just don't see it.
She better not come by my house next year, because I'm gonna try to get the largest Trump banner in 2020 I can find, hang it right from my balcony. And I live right on Common Street, so it'll be easily visible. All right, so going back to the workings again, so then twice a year we have what we call town meeting, where we
Yes.
have like 152 RTMs, and they either approve the budget or not, and they go over every item, one being a controversial one where they wanted like $11 million to put a new athletic facility, and that was shot down, and you
Yes.
played a key role in that. But can you fill the audience in a little about some of your ideas where you were a select person, how the town could run more efficiently, save the taxpayers money, and where the bulk of the money goes? I know school and education is used, but we get a lot of subsidies from the state
Yeah.
with that. So if you could give them like a quick review of the budget and some of your ideas how we can save money and run it more efficiently.
Right. So, the majority of the town, of any government's budget really goes to personnel costs. One of the things that I noticed Walpole doing in the last 10 years is really increasing the size of the government in terms of hiring new personnel or creating new positions. And really, the population growth, the percentage of population growth and the number of increased population hasn't supported that need. So I think one of the things Walpole can do is perhaps slow down its growth, its explosion of creating positions. I mean, yourself, there was a position created, an employee benefits coordinator.
Right.
When I was a select woman, even before that position was created, I had started doing some research into outsourcing certain positions as people retire, because you don't want people to lose their jobs, but as people retire, to contract it out, so that way you'd save, in the long run. So I presented that information to the other board members, to the town administrator, as far as, I don't think we need this position, especially because the position, the specific one, employee benefits coordinator, does not benefit the taxpayers of Walpole at all.
Right.
It was a position to benefit the town employees, and even then, ADP could have done the same thing. As you know, you applied for that job, and you
Right.
were well qualified for it. And as we know, it went to the personnel director's daughter. And the personnel director is a lovely woman, very, very smart, knows her stuff, and really good. But it's little things like that. Same thing with the stipends. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Walpole spends millions of dollars in stipends and overtime on its
Right.
town employees. Stipends isn't even addressed in the
Right.
personnel bylaws. And when I was on the personnel board, I had, I would say, although it was controversial when I said it, the assistant town administrator said, don't keep saying that, that's not true. But to me, using the stipends was a device to circumvent the personnel salary schedule, because you would give a stipend over and above the maximum amount you could pay on the
Right.
on the personnel scale. Anyways, to come back, I think the labor costs are are large and growing, and I think Walpole could cut back on that. But I think they're because the mindset is to tax to the max and maximize all the
Right.
revenue, it's what they do with that excess revenue after they do the regular budget, which, again,
Right.
I will go back to, I think the regular budget, they do a really good job. Jim Johnson and the department heads really look at what's needed, and that's what they budget. It's the excess at the end of the year that I think, quote-unquote, needs are created, such as the fields. I think the fields, there's people that want fields, there's people that don't want fields. It's definitely a good debate to have. I think there's a little bit of hypocrisy because I think it was being sold to the taxpayers as we need fields because we don't have enough fields as it is.
Right.
But when it turns out the new fields that they're building is only going to be 4 fields, and they're going to be this mega. They really didn't want it to just add on to the fields. I think there was a different reason. They wanted a bigger jewel in the crown. And then there's also, if we can't even take care of the fields that we have, what are we doing building new fields? I think if it was up to me, and if I was town administration and town meeting, I think it would be a great ballot question. I think the voters of Walpole should decide whether there
On
should
a
be fields.
referendum.
A referendum, because I think when you're spending $9 million on, $9 million is is just about what was spent on the police station, or the fire station, or the senior center. So you spend that much on critical buildings, and then you're saying, well, we need to spend that much on fields. I think if the people that want the fields feel that strongly about it, they would feel comfortable giving a referendum, letting the voters decide, and then I think it would be very fair, because then you could say, hey, we gave it our best. If the voters decided to say,
Right.
yes, we want these fields, great.
Okay.
Again, I think it's just something, people have different positions on it,
Right.
whether it's important enough to spend that much money on.
We have about 3 minutes left. Time flies by when
It
you're having
does.
fun, I guess. But let's talk a little bit about, you perceive the town being friendly to business, or could they do more to encourage business or treat business more fairly? And the reason I ask you that, my next guest I'm going to have on is a local business man, Jay Santos, a Super Auto, to talk about his business and how he feels about the town, if it's user-friendly. So you could spend like a minute on that, and then inevitably I'm going to ask you what your future plans are for public office.
Right. So I think the town administration wants to do well by its businesses because they do want new businesses to come in and feel comfortable. I think that there are some bureaucrats in town that make it difficult for businesses. I think they really, the tail wags the dog in terms of regulation, that they put certain businesses through special hoops. I think because Walpole is a small town, sometimes personal feelings get in the way of how they treat certain individuals that own businesses. And I think that's an unfortunate byproduct of being a small town, as opposed to when you're a bigger town, things are
Right.
black and white. And then there's, some of the heads of the boards or committees may have an agenda, and they don't give someone, really,
Right.
I think the fair treatment that they deserve. But I do know, just from being a selectman, the Walpole Board of Selectmen wants to be business friendly.
Right.
They really do. I don't know how.
Well, they should,
Well, it's-
because that's a big source of their revenue. Commercial
Absolutely.
taxes that are usually higher than residential
They
taxes.
are higher.
And it creates jobs in the
It
economy.
creates jobs. People, it creates jobs
Right.
for the kids. And I always
Right.
say, I look at businesses. I think they should be. I think they should have a lower rate because they're the ones that use the least amount of resources
Right.
that the town has to offer.
Right. And
So they
sometimes
should be
the-
cherished. The businesses should be cherished.
And sometimes the larger companies that have deeper pockets, because they employ more people, they get all sorts of TIFs, tax advantages.
Right, and I mean, I'm an advocate for TIFs. I mean, I'd like to see TIFs
Right.
go to every business. I would just like to see an overall, across the board, tax reduction for businesses and residents.
Okay, we got 30 seconds left, so real quickly, any political future ambitions?
It's funny because when I left Walpole and I decided I didn't want to be a select woman anymore, I said, well, what could I do? And I was thinking strongly about politics at the state level, a state senate or somewhere in the legislature.
Right?
So I'm still pondering that. I'm not quite sure. Then I was really thinking, you know what? why just stop at the state level? Maybe I could, because I know I was going into the 4th district at the federal level, and I know I was thinking, I could run against Joe Kennedy,
Right.
because he has a record that I could run against, which I would love that.
Well.
So I'm not sure what I'm going to do, but I definitely think I would like to help someone with their campaign, because I know what it's like to knock on
Right.
doors.
Well, we appreciate you coming on the show, and we'll be looking for your name in the future. And like I say, I had the pleasure of working with you.
Thank you.
And you did a fantastic job for the people of this town, and you'll be sadly missed. And but we'll still see you, I'm sure.
You
And I'd
will.
like
I'm
to have
still
you on
actually-
again, perhaps in the future, and we'll touch base again.
Thank you. It was my honor
Well,
and
thank
my
you
privilege.
for coming on, and thank you
Thank
for
you.
your hard work and public service.
Thank you very much.
Stay
Dick.
tuned for the next episode of An Outside View.